The wedding hall glowed with crystal chandeliers, their reflections dancing across golden walls. Guests murmured in admiration, the air thick with money, power, and the scent of imported roses. Tonight was supposed to be the happiest night of Emily Carter's life. At only 27, pregnant with her first child, she stood in front of the gilded mirror in her bridal suite, adjusting the lace veil her late mother had once dreamed she would wear. Her hands trembled not because of nerves, but because of exhaustion. Carrying Adrian Blackwell's child had drained her body, but her heart was free of hope. She believed she was about to marry the man who promised her forever. But fate had other plans. Minutes before she was meant to walk down the aisle, Emily reached for her phone on the vanity. Instead, she froze. From the half-open door came Adrian's voice, sharp and arrogant, dripping with a truth that sliced through her chest like a blade. "She's perfect for the deal," Adrian muttered into his phone. "Once the ceremony is done, her father's old connections are mine. After that, Emily is nothing more than a pregnant trophy. Vanessa knows her place. She'll always come first." Emily's breath stopped. Her knees nearly buckled beneath the weight of the words. She pressed a trembling hand to her belly, as if shielding her unborn child from the poison leaking into her heart. Her fiancé, the billionaire she trusted, wasn't marrying her out of love. It was business. And worse, he admitted another woman, Vanessa, held his true affection. The laughter that followed his words echoed like thunder in her ears. Guests applauded outside, unaware that the bride was suffocating behind a velvet curtain. Her childhood dream shattered in a single phone call. The man who had whispered promises into her hair on sleepless nights, who had kissed her forehead as she battled morning sickness, was nothing but a liar. Emily bit her lip until she tasted blood, forcing back sobs that threatened to betray her presence. This was her wedding day. Hundreds of cameras waited to capture her smile, not her tears. Yet the betrayal sliced so deep she couldn't breathe. Images of Adrian holding her hand at doctor appointments flashed through her mind. She remembered the night he whispered, "Our baby will grow up in love, Em." How cruel those words sounded now. She stumbled backward, knocking over a bouquet of white roses. Petals scattered across the marble floor like broken pieces of her heart. She wanted to scream, to tear off the gown, to run far away. But her body froze, paralyzed between rage and despair. And then another sound pierced the silence, the subtle click of heels. From the hallway drifted a woman's laugh, soft, confident, intimate. Vanessa, she was here, just outside, stepping into the same sacred space meant for the bride. Emily's pulse hammered. The betrayal wasn't a rumor or a suspicion. It was real, unfolding minutes before her vows. Her baby shifted inside her as if sensing her anguish. Tears blurred her vision, but behind them burned something new, fire. The girl who once believed in fairy tales died in that moment. What rose in her place was a woman who would no longer be silent. And as the orchestra began to play the wedding march, Emily wiped her tears, stood tall, and whispered to herself, "They will all remember tonight, but not for the reason Adrian planned." Emily Carter had never asked for a life of luxury. Born in a quiet suburb of Philadelphia, she grew up in a small brick house where her mother worked double shifts as a nurse and her father repaired cars in their driveway just to keep food on the table. Emily wasn't raised with silk sheets or fancy cars. She was raised with love, sacrifice, and the belief that kindness mattered more than wealth. Her childhood was filled with secondhand dresses, public libraries, and the warmth of neighbors who treated her like family. She had a talent for art and a dream of becoming an event designer, the kind who could transform empty rooms into magical spaces. But after her mother passed away from a sudden illness, Emily put her dreams aside to support her younger sister. At just 19, she became both sister and caretaker, working nights as a waitress while studying design at a community college. She was strong, but quiet about her pain. Those who met her often noticed her gentle smile, unaware of the storms she weathered in silence. She was the kind of woman who remembered birthdays, who brought soup to sick neighbors, who comforted strangers at bus stops. Her generosity made people trust her, and her innocence made her vulnerable. When she first met Adrian Blackwell, she thought fate had finally rewarded her. He was magnetic, confident, and attentive in a way that made her feel like the most important person in the world. He swept her into a life she never imagined. Glittering galas, expensive dinners, promises of security. For the first time since childhood, Emily allowed herself to believe in fairy tales. When she discovered she was pregnant, Emily cried tears of joy. She imagined a future filled with bedtime stories, baby giggles, and family breakfasts. Though Adrian's smiles sometimes felt distant, she convinced herself it was stress from his empire. She carried the weight of the pregnancy mostly alone, but she never complained. She told herself she was building a family, the one she had always dreamed of since losing her mother. Behind closed doors, however, cracks began to show. Adrian's patience grew thin. He snapped at her cravings, mocked her modest clothes, and insisted she present herself better. At events, Emily brushed it off, believing his love was still real. She convinced herself that once the wedding came, everything would change. He would see her not just as his fiancé, but as the mother of his child. She kept giving, sacrificing, and hoping. At 5 months pregnant, she worked tirelessly on the wedding details herself, pouring her heart into designing the perfect night. It wasn't just about impressing guests. It was her way of showing Adrian she was worthy of his world. She chose soft ivory roses to honor her mother, golden candles for warmth, and a string quartet because Adrian once said violins calmed him. Every detail was a love letter. But Emily carried another weight, one far heavier than the lace gown draped across her shoulders. She carried fear. Fear that she wasn't enough. Fear that Adrian's sharp words meant something darker. Fear that the child in her belly would grow up in a cold home, just as she had feared when she lost her mother. Still, she clung to hope. Even in the face of doubt, she whispered to her unborn baby every night, "Daddy loves us. He's just tired. Everything will be better after the wedding." And so on that fateful night, Emily stood in her bridal suite, not as a billionaire's fiancé, but as a woman who had given every piece of herself for love. She was vulnerable, 5 months pregnant, alone in a sea of strangers dressed in diamonds. She had no idea that minutes before walking down the aisle, the fairy tale she built would collapse. Because Emily Carter, the girl who believed love could fix everything, was about to become the woman who would burn it all down. The Crystal Crown Hotel was no ordinary venue. It was the crown jewel of Manhattan, a place where billionaires flaunted their fortunes and politicians whispered secrets behind crystal flutes of champagne. Tonight, its grand ballroom had been transformed into a palace of gold and ivory. Hundreds of candles flickered across towering candelabras, their flames dancing beneath a ceiling painted with constellations. 1,000 white roses perfumed the air, mingling with the scent of aged wine and polished marble. Every detail screamed wealth, power, and control. Adrian Blackwell had spared no expense. The guest list read like a Forbes ranking: CEOs, senators, celebrities, and socialites. A live orchestra played near the stage, their violins weaving a haunting melody that seemed to echo the tension building behind the scenes. Photographers lined the red carpet outside, capturing every sequin and every diamond. To the world, this was the wedding of the year. To Emily, it was supposed to be the beginning of a new chapter. Guests whispered as they admired the extravagance. "Look at the chandeliers. Those are imported from Venice. I heard the cake cost $50,000. Adrian really knows how to show off." They didn't know the bride was trembling upstairs, her smile fractured by a truth she wasn't ready to reveal. The ballroom buzzed with polite laughter, but beneath the surface, ambition pulsed like a living thing. Men in tailored tuxedos exchanged business cards between bites of caviar. Women in glittering gowns compared diamonds as if they were weapons. Every conversation carried an undertone: alliances, investments, opportunities. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a transaction wrapped in lace and champagne. At the center of it all stood Adrian, tall and confident, his black tuxedo cut to perfection. He raised his glass to a cluster of investors, his voice smooth as silk. "Tonight is more than a union," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's the promise of legacy." The men laughed and clapped him on the back. To them, Emily wasn't a bride, she was leverage. Meanwhile, Vanessa lingered in the crowd. She wore a crimson gown that clung to her figure, her lips painted to match. Guests mistook her for a guest of honor, unaware she was the very woman Adrian whispered about in secret. Her smirk, held the arrogance of someone who believed she had already won. Above the chaos, Emily stood hidden behind a velvet curtain that overlooked the ballroom from a balcony. Her hands clutched the railing, her heart pounding as she watched Adrian charm the crowd. He looked every inch the billionaire prince, smiling for cameras, shaking hands, playing the perfect groom. But Emily knew the truth now. Every compliment he gave, every toast he raised, was a performance. She pressed her palm against her belly, whispering to her unborn child, "This isn't love, this is theater." The music swelled, the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our bride." The crowd erupted in applause, all eyes turning toward the entrance where Emily was supposed to appear. But Emily didn't move. Her veil trembled in her hands. She wasn't just battling fear, she was battling fury. The ballroom waited. The orchestra played louder and whispers spread like wildfire. Where was the bride? The stage was set, the guests restless, Adrian's smile faltering. Emily knew she had only moments to decide: walk into the trap of betrayal, or step into the fire and rewrite the ending herself. And as the music built to a climax, Emily took a deep breath, ready to descend. Not as the obedient bride Adrian expected, but as the storm that would tear his perfect world apart. Adrian Blackwell had spent his entire life learning how to wear masks. To the public, he was the billionaire prodigy, the man who turned risky investments into gold, who smiled on magazine covers, who graced Forbes' list of top 30 under 30 before he was even 30. To the women who adored him, he was the charming gentleman who opened car doors, whispered sweet promises, and showered them with diamond necklaces. But beneath the polish and power, Adrian was a predator. He loved two things: control and appearances. Emily had been the perfect illusion for him. She was beautiful, innocent, and pregnant, symbols of purity that softened his otherwise ruthless reputation. He knew the press would eat it up. Billionaire family man. Investors loved stability, and nothing said stability like a glowing wife and an heir on the way. But Adrian's real passion was standing across the ballroom in a red gown. Vanessa Liu. Vanessa had entered his life less than a year ago as his ambitious assistant. 26, razor sharp, with a smile that could cut glass, she had clawed her way up from obscurity. She wasn't naive like Emily. She was cunning, hungry, and willing to play dirty. Adrian admired that. Where Emily offered devotion, Vanessa offered fire. Where Emily sacrificed, Vanessa demanded, and Adrian loved the chase. He had promised Vanessa more than stolen kisses in limousines. He promised her a future. Once the ink dries on the Carter deal, he had whispered into her hair, "You'll have everything. The money, the company, the world." She believed him. She had to. After all, she had given up her reputation, her career, even her dignity to be with him. Tonight, she stood confidently at the edge of the ballroom, sipping champagne while Emily prepared upstairs. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was the mistress at the groom's wedding, dressed like a queen, daring anyone to challenge her presence. A few guests raised their brows but said nothing. No one wanted to offend Adrian Blackwell. Adrian himself thrived on the double life. To Emily, he was the devoted fiancé, rehearsing vows he didn't mean. To Vanessa, he was the mastermind, plotting a future without the burden of a wife he secretly mocked. He played both roles effortlessly, switching between them as if changing ties, but his arrogance was his weakness. He believed Emily would never find out. He believed no one could touch him, not with his billions, his influence, his carefully crafted image. That belief blinded him to the storm about to break. As Adrian mingled with politicians and CEOs, his eyes kept drifting to Vanessa. A subtle smirk, a lingering glance, the brush of his hand against hers when no one was looking. It was a dangerous dance, yet he enjoyed the risk. For him, life wasn't about loyalty. It was about winning. And yet, even surrounded by flashing cameras and applause, there was a flicker of fear in Adrian's chest. Not love. Never love. Fear. Fear of exposure. Fear that the mask might slip at the wrong moment. Fear that Emily, sweet, trusting Emily, might be smarter than he gave her credit for. Vanessa leaned in, her voice low but sharp as a blade. "She'll never see it coming," she whispered. Adrian's smirk deepened. He believed her. But what neither of them knew was that Emily had already heard everything. And as Adrian raised his glass in a toast to a future built on lies, the bride upstairs was preparing to destroy the illusion he thought was untouchable. The orchestra swelled, and the ballroom doors opened with a grand flourish. Guests leaned forward in anticipation, cameras flashing as they prepared to capture the perfect image of a billionaire's fairy tale wedding. But instead of Emily walking gracefully down the aisle, silence filled the room. A murmur spread like wildfire. Where was the bride? Adrian's jaw tightened, but he masked it with a smile. He raised his hand, pretending this was all part of the plan. "She'll be here," he reassured the crowd. But the seconds stretched into minutes, and the weight of expectation pressed against the golden walls. Then it happened. From the side entrance, Vanessa Liu appeared. Not hidden in the shadows as a discreet guest, not sneaking around as a mistress should. No, she walked boldly into the center of the ballroom in her crimson gown, her chin high, her smile daring. For a heartbeat, no one understood what they were seeing. But then the whispers erupted. "Isn't that Adrian's assistant? She looks far too comfortable." "Wait, why is she standing next to the groom?" Adrian froze. He had not told her to do this. His plan had been control, careful manipulation behind closed doors. Vanessa, however, had her own agenda. She slipped her arm through his with a confidence that sent a shockwave through the crowd. Photographers gasped, cameras clicking furiously. The image of Adrian Blackwell with another woman on his wedding day would travel faster than wildfire. "Adrian," Vanessa purred loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "you didn't tell me it would be this beautiful tonight." Her voice carried, sharp and sweet like poisoned honey. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. A senator's wife covered her mouth. A business rival smirked with delight. Every guest felt the scandal tightening like a noose. Adrian tried to recover. He laughed stiffly, prying her hand off his arm. "Vanessa, what are you doing?" he hissed through clenched teeth. But the microphones nearby picked up his words, echoing them across the ballroom. "What is going on?" one guest whispered. "Why would she call him Adrian so casually?" Vanessa's smile widened. She loved this. The attention, the chaos, the destruction of Emily's picture-perfect moment. "Why pretend?" she said softly, but just loud enough for the cameras. "Everyone will know soon enough. You promised me tonight." The room erupted. Guests whispered. Reporters scribbled notes. Cameras flashed in a frenzy. Adrian's carefully constructed mask cracked. He forced a smile, trying to laugh it off as a joke, but his eyes darted nervously toward the staircase where Emily was supposed to appear. And then, as if summoned by fate, Emily stepped into view. She stood at the top of the grand staircase, her veil flowing, her eyes red from tears that no one could see under the soft lighting. The entire room gasped, not because she looked broken, but because she looked radiant, powerful even, like a queen walking into battle. Her gaze swept over Adrian and Vanessa, her lips curling into a cold, almost defiant smile. She knew what she had heard. And now, everyone else had a glimpse of it too. The silence was deafening. Emily gripped the railing, her belly round beneath the silk gown, her presence undeniable. Every camera turned to her, every whisper died. Adrian reached out a hand, desperate to salvage the moment. "Emily, my love, it's not what it looks like." But Emily's eyes locked on his, unblinking. And before the entire ballroom, she spoke her first words of the night. "No, Adrian, it's exactly what it looks like." The ballroom still echoed with gasps and whispers as Emily turned away from Adrian's outstretched hand. The orchestra had stopped playing, and the silence pressed in like a heavy curtain. Cameras flashed, capturing her every step as she walked steadily down the staircase, her veil trailing behind her like a banner of defiance. But once the crowd faded and the doors to the bridal suite shut behind her, the weight of it all came crashing down. Emily collapsed against the vanity table, her trembling hands clutching the edge as sobs tore through her chest. Her reflection in the mirror startled her. The bride staring back wasn't the glowing woman she had imagined, but a broken figure with smeared mascara, red eyes, and lips trembling with silent grief. She yanked the veil from her head and threw it to the floor, the lace crumpling like the fairy tale she once believed in. Her chest heaved, her breaths shallow. She pressed both palms to her belly, whispering through the sobs, "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." The life inside her shifted, a gentle kick reminding her that she wasn't completely alone. Yet at that moment, loneliness wrapped around her like chains. Memories flooded her mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. Adrian's laughter when he first told her he loved her. The nights he held her hair back as she vomited through morning sickness. The promises he made about building a family together. Every moment now twisted into a cruel joke, a performance meant to keep her in place while he pursued another woman. Her sobs turned into anger, a raw sound that shook the room. She grabbed the bouquet of roses from the table and hurled it across the suite, petals exploding across the carpet. "How could you?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "How could you do this to me? To our child?" The walls seemed to close in. The weight of humiliation crushed her. The guests' whispers, the cameras flashing, Vanessa's smirk. She could almost hear them laughing at her, mocking the naive little bride who thought love was enough to hold on to a billionaire. She had walked into a war zone unarmed, and now she was bleeding in silence. Her phone buzzed on the table. Dozens of messages, reporters asking for a statement, friends begging for answers. Emily swiped it away, unable to face the world. Her hands shook as she lowered herself to the floor, curling against the side of the bed, tears soaking the silk of her gown. She thought of her mother. If she were alive, she would have known what to say. She would have told Emily to stand tall, to fight for her dignity. But Emily wasn't her mother. She was tired, scared, and 5 months pregnant. All she wanted was to disappear, to vanish before the humiliation consumed her completely. Minutes blurred into what felt like hours. The muffled sounds of the gala carried through the walls. Laughter, music, clinking glasses. Life outside continued, indifferent to her collapse. Finally, Emily dragged herself up, her body heavy with exhaustion. She stared once more into the mirror. This time she didn't see just a broken bride. She saw someone at a crossroads. The girl who begged for love could stay curled on the floor, but the woman carrying a child deserved more. Tears still streaked her cheeks, but her eyes sharpened. The storm inside her wasn't done, and in that quiet suite, Emily whispered a promise to herself and her unborn baby. "They will not see me fall again." The bridal suite was quiet now, broken only by the sound of Emily's uneven breaths. Her tears had dried, leaving streaks of black mascara on her pale cheeks. She sat on the floor exhausted, her wedding gown pooling around her like a defeated soldier's armor. For a moment, she thought the world outside had forgotten her. She wished it had. Then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate taps on the door. Emily stiffened. She expected Adrian, his voice smooth with excuses, or Vanessa, smug and triumphant. Her chest tightened as the doorknob turned. She wanted to scream, to tell whoever it was to leave her alone. But the door creaked open, and instead of Adrian, a different figure stepped inside. It was Ethan Morgan. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that silenced rooms, Ethan was the kind of man people noticed even when he said nothing. A successful CEO in his own right, he was Adrian's business rival, though few knew the depth of their rivalry. To the public, Ethan was private, mysterious, the kind of billionaire who avoided cameras. To Emily, he was a ghost from her past. "Emily," he said softly, closing the door behind him. "You don't have to hide." Her throat tightened. "Why are you here?" she whispered. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "Because I couldn't stand by and watch him destroy you. Not you. Not like this." She blinked, confused. "You knew?" "I knew enough," Ethan replied, his jaw clenched, anger flashing across his face. "Adrian's been careless. Vanessa wasn't exactly discreet. But tonight," he paused, his voice low and steady. "Tonight he went too far." Emily felt her breath catch. Someone believed her. Someone saw the truth. For hours she had carried the weight of humiliation alone. But now, standing before her, was proof that she wasn't crazy, wasn't weak. But why him? Why Ethan? As if sensing her doubt, Ethan crouched down so they were eye level. "Your mother once helped my family. Years ago, when we lost everything, she gave us a second chance. She said kindness was never wasted. I never forgot that, and I promised myself, if I could ever repay her, I would." Emily's chest tightened. Memories of her mother's generosity, her gentle voice, her quiet strength came rushing back. She had never known the full extent of her mother's kindness. But now, in the middle of her darkest night, that kindness had come back to protect her. Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim folder. He placed it gently on the vanity. "Inside is everything you need. Proof of Adrian's betrayal. Financial fraud, backroom deals, even photos of him with Vanessa. He thinks he's untouchable. But he isn't." Emily stared at the folder, her hands trembling. Her heart raced with a mix of fear and hope. This was more than revenge. It was power, the very weapon Adrian thought she'd never have. "Why are you giving this to me?" she asked, her voice shaky. Ethan's eyes softened. "Because you deserve better, and because he should never see you as weak again." Emily swallowed hard. For the first time that night, her tears weren't from despair, but from something else: resolve. She wasn't just a broken bride anymore. She was a woman with a choice, a woman holding evidence that could shatter Adrian's empire. Her hand hovered over the folder, and when her fingers finally touched it, she felt the weight of destiny pressing into her palms. And in that moment, Emily knew the game had changed. Adrian wasn't the only one with power anymore. Emily sat motionless, the folder Ethan left resting on her lap like a ticking time bomb. Hours ago, she had been a trembling bride, terrified of humiliation, begging silently for love that no longer existed. Now, as she flipped through the pages, every line of evidence carved away the last remnants of her innocence. Bank transfers, secret accounts, photos of Adrian and Vanessa in private resorts, contracts signed under her name without her knowledge. It was all there, ugly and undeniable. Adrian hadn't just betrayed her heart, he had used her, her pregnancy, even her family's connections, as pawns in his endless game of greed. The sobs that had once racked her body no longer came. Instead, a strange calmness spread through her chest, cold and sharp as steel. She rose from the floor and walked toward the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who had collapsed hours earlier. The tears were gone. The makeup was smeared, yes, but her eyes burned with a new light. Determination. She slowly peeled off the ruined bridal gown. The delicate lace felt foreign now, a costume of a naive girl who thought love could protect her. Piece by piece, she shed it, leaving behind the broken bride. She slipped into a simple black dress from her suitcase, one she had packed just in case of emergencies. Tonight, it became her armor. Emily tied her hair back, exposing her face fully for the first time. She no longer wanted to hide. She wanted every camera, every guest, every whispering mouth to see her, not as Adrian's fragile fiancé, but as the woman who refused to be erased. Her hands brushed across her belly. "We're gonna be okay," she whispered to her unborn child, "because your mother isn't weak anymore." The baby shifted, and for the first time Emily felt it not as a burden, but as a source of strength. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for the life inside her, for a future that Adrian didn't deserve to control. When Ethan returned an hour later, he stopped at the doorway, stunned. Gone was the shattered bride in white. Standing before him was a woman cloaked in quiet power. "You look," he began, but his words faltered. "Different?" Emily asked, her voice steady. She closed the folder and held it firmly in her hand. "I have everything I need. Now I just need the right moment." Ethan nodded slowly, admiration flickering in his eyes. "Then let's give you that moment." As they spoke, the muffled sounds of the gala still drifted through the walls. Music, laughter, the clink of champagne glasses. Adrian was downstairs, basking in the illusion of victory. He had no idea that the woman he thought he broke was already preparing his downfall. Emily glanced once more at her reflection. The transformation was complete. The timid girl who begged for love was gone. In her place stood a mother, a fighter, and a strategist. The betrayal that once threatened to destroy her had instead forged her into something unbreakable. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and walked toward the door. Each step was a vow. She would not be silent. She would not bow. She would not let Adrian write her story. Because tonight, in front of every guest and every flashing camera, Emily Carter was no longer a victim. She was the storm. The ballroom had regained its rhythm. Guests sipped champagne, gossiping in hushed voices about the scandal that had nearly derailed the night. Adrian had smoothed over the chaos with forced laughter and empty reassurances. A misunderstanding, he called it, brushing off Vanessa's bold display as if it were nothing. The orchestra played again, though the melody felt hollow and the crowd buzzed with curiosity. Adrian believed he had regained control. He always did. His charm, his money, his name, they had gotten him out of worse situations. But as he raised his glass for yet another toast, the doors to the ballroom opened. Emily stepped inside. The room fell silent. No longer in her bridal gown, she wore a sleek black dress that clung to her frame, her hair pulled back, her face free of tears. The cameras turned instantly, bulbs flashing like lightning. She looked like a woman transformed, every step measured, every breath steady. A queen walking into her court. Adrian's smile faltered. "Emily," he said, his voice loud enough to carry. "My love, there you are. Join me." But Emily didn't move toward him. Instead, she walked to the center of the ballroom. The crowd parted, whispers rising in waves. She turned slowly, letting every pair of eyes settle on her. When she finally spoke, her voice carried clear and sharp across the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "thank you for being here tonight. You came to witness a wedding. Instead, you will witness the truth." A murmur rippled through the guests. Adrian's jaw tightened. "Emily, that's enough," he snapped, his voice low. She ignored him. With steady hands, she lifted the folder Ethan had given her. "This is what my fiancé has been doing behind closed doors. Fraud, lies, betrayal, and yes, an affair with the woman you all saw earlier." Gasps filled the ballroom. Cameras clicked wildly. Vanessa paled, her smirk vanishing as reporters surged forward. Emily opened the folder, pulling out photographs and documents. She held them high, passing them to the nearest journalist. "These are copies. Take them. See for yourselves." The room exploded into chaos. Reporters lunged for the papers, snapping photos of contracts, financial records, images of Adrian and Vanessa entwined in luxury hotels. Guests whispered furiously, reputations and investments unraveling with every passing second. Adrian lunged forward, his face red. "Stop this madness," he roared. "You're hysterical. She's hysterical." Emily turned to him, her eyes like steel. "No, Adrian, I'm not hysterical. I'm finished." Her words struck like a slap. The crowd fell silent again, every gaze locked on her. She placed a hand on her belly, her voice soft but unyielding. "I carried your child believing you were a man of honor. I sacrificed, I trusted, I believed. But tonight, I take back my dignity. You will never control me again." The silence that followed was deafening. Then slowly applause began. It started with one guest, then another, until the entire ballroom thundered with claps. Not for Adrian, for Emily. She lifted her chin, letting the moment wash over her. This was no longer Adrian's night, it was hers. And as Adrian stood frozen in the spotlight, his empire unraveling, Emily Carter smiled, the kind of smile that promised the storm had only just begun. The ballroom was still echoing with applause when Emily lowered her hand from her belly and stood tall, letting the silence return. Every camera, every guest, every whispering mouth was fixed on her. For the first time that night, she was not the subject of pity. She was the embodiment of power. Adrian tried to speak, his voice trembling with rage. "You think you've won? You think anyone will believe this?" He gestured wildly toward the journalists clutching documents, toward Vanessa shrinking behind him. "They'll see you for what you are, a bitter woman with nothing." Emily's calmness cut through his outburst like a blade. "Nothing?" she repeated, her voice steady, resonant. She stepped closer, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "I have everything that matters, my child, my dignity, and the truth that's more than you will ever have." Gasps echoed again. Adrian's face flushed crimson, but the crowd no longer looked at him with admiration. They looked at him with disgust. Investors exchanged uneasy glances. Politicians turned away. The empire he had built on charm and illusion was crumbling in front of his eyes. Emily took a deep breath, her voice softening. "To every woman in this room and to every woman watching through those cameras, I want you to hear me clearly. Do not let anyone convince you that you are weak. Do not sacrifice yourself for a man who does not value you, and never, ever let betrayal define you." Her words struck the crowd with the weight of truth. Some women nodded, others wiped away tears. Even men shifted uncomfortably, confronted by the mirror she held up to their world. She placed her hand over her belly again, this time not in sorrow, but in pride. "This child will grow up knowing that their mother chose strength over silence, dignity over shame. And I will raise them to know that love is not meant to be a cage, but a shelter. I may have walked into this night as a bride, but I will walk out as something stronger, a mother, a survivor, and a woman who will never be broken again." The applause returned, louder this time, rising like thunder. People stood from their seats, clapping, cheering, some even chanting her name. Cameras flashed in a frenzy, immortalizing her transformation. Vanessa slipped out the side door, her crimson gown a streak of shame. Adrian stood rooted, his fists clenched, his empire collapsing. For the first time in his life, he was powerless, and he knew it. Emily turned, her eyes finding Ethan across the room. He gave her a small nod, one of respect, not pity. She nodded back. Their story was not about romance, not yet. Tonight was about reclaiming her life. She walked toward the exit, each step strong, her head high. The guests parted, creating a path as if in reverence. By the time she reached the doors, she was no longer the abandoned bride of a scandalous wedding. She was the woman who turned betrayal into fire and humiliation into triumph. As the doors closed behind her, the orchestra began to play again. Not the wedding march, but a triumphant symphony, as if the universe itself honored her courage. And with that, Emily Carter left the ballroom not as a victim of Adrian Blackwell, but as a symbol for every woman who has ever been underestimated. By sunrise, the city was no longer talking about the wedding that never was. It was talking about Adrian Blackwell's fall from grace. The morning papers didn't show glossy photos of the ceremony or glowing headlines of a billionaire's fairy tale marriage. Instead, they screamed with scandal. Blackwell betrayal exposed at altar. Pregnant bride shames billionaire in front of elite crowd. Adrian Blackwell, fraud, affair, and the wedding disaster of the year. The front pages were brutal. Images of Emily standing tall in her black dress dominated every cover, her hand on her belly, her eyes burning with quiet strength. She wasn't painted as a victim, she was celebrated as a heroine. Meanwhile, Adrian's photos told another story. Shots of him lunging forward in anger, his face twisted with desperation, his hand reaching out toward Emily only to be rejected before the world. The captions mocked him, the groom who lost everything. Television anchors replayed the footage on loop. Clips of Emily's speech spread across social media. Her words translated into hashtags. Never broken, strength over silence, Emily Carter. Millions watched, millions shared, millions cheered. Overnight, she became a symbol. But for Adrian, the consequences went far beyond humiliation. By noon, stock in Blackwell Enterprises plummeted. Investors pulled out in droves, terrified of the fraud allegations Emily revealed. Contracts were canceled, partnerships dissolved. Politicians who once clung to Adrian for campaign donations suddenly distanced themselves, claiming ignorance. His phone, once buzzing with admiration, now flooded with messages of disgust. Vanessa, his mistress, disappeared into the shadows. The same woman who boldly strutted through the ballroom vanished when the world turned against them. Tabloids caught her boarding a flight to Europe, alone, her crimson gown traded for a hoodie and sunglasses. She had gambled on Adrian's power, and when it crumbled, she left him to burn alone. The board of directors at Blackwell Enterprises called an emergency meeting. For years they tolerated Adrian's arrogance because he made them rich. Now he was a liability. Within 24 hours, whispers of his removal circulated. By the end of the week, the whispers would become reality. And Emily? She stayed silent. She refused interviews, declined comment requests, avoided the paparazzi who camped outside her apartment. The world wanted her voice, but she gave them nothing. Her silence made her more powerful. She had already spoken the truth where it mattered. Before the cameras, before the crowd. There was nothing more to say. Still, behind closed doors, Emily watched the storm unfold with a quiet resolve. She didn't smile at Adrian's downfall, nor did she celebrate his ruin. She wasn't driven by vengeance anymore. She was focused on one thing, her child's future. But the city had other plans. Strangers sent her letters of support. Women shared their own stories of betrayal, and talk shows hailed her as the woman who humbled a billionaire. Whether she wanted it or not, Emily had become a symbol of resilience. Adrian, meanwhile, locked himself in his penthouse, blinds drawn, drinking heavily as the world devoured him alive. He replayed the moment of Emily's defiance again and again, each time feeling his empire slip further from his grasp. The man who once believed he was untouchable was now a pariah. And as the headlines grew harsher and the empire collapsed, one truth echoed through every newsroom and boardroom alike. Adrian Blackwell's reign was over, and it was Emily Carter who ended it. For weeks after the scandal, Emily kept her world small. She spent her mornings in a modest apartment she rented under her maiden name, away from paparazzi, away from curious neighbors. She cooked simple meals, read quietly in the mornings, and placed her hand on her belly each night, whispering promises to the life growing inside her. At first, the silence felt heavy. After years of standing in Adrian's shadow, she wasn't sure who she was without him, but slowly she began to remember. Before Adrian, Emily Carter was an artist, a designer with dreams of transforming spaces into living poetry. She had given that up when she stepped into his world. Now, with nothing left to lose, she returned to the very passion that once fueled her. She started small. One morning, she dug out her old sketchbooks from a box she'd hidden away years ago. The pages smelled of dust and forgotten dreams, but the drawings inside still carried her heart. She traced the lines with her fingers, and for the first time in months, she smiled. With the encouragement of her younger sister, Sophie, she began reaching out to old contacts. Friends who remembered her talent were eager to help. Soon, she was sketching designs for weddings, galas, and charity events. Ironically, the scandal that had humiliated her became her strongest calling card. Clients whispered, "She's the woman who stood up to Adrian Blackwell." To them, she wasn't just a designer. She was proof of strength. Within 3 months, Emily secured her first major contract, redesigning the interior of a new women's shelter funded by one of Adrian's former rivals. She poured herself into the project, working long nights despite her growing belly. She chose warm tones, soft textures, spaces that felt safe. Every stroke of her pencil was a message. You are not broken. You are home. As she worked, the baby inside her kicked more often, as if urging her forward. Each movement reminded her why she fought so hard. She was no longer building a life for Adrian's approval. She was building a legacy for her child. But rebuilding wasn't just about work. It was about herself. Emily took long walks in the park, letting the crisp autumn air fill her lungs. She enrolled in prenatal yoga, where she met other expectant mothers who reminded her that she wasn't alone. She laughed again, something she thought she had forgotten how to do. Ethan appeared occasionally, always respectful, never pushing. He would drop by with coffee, offer business advice, or simply listen when the weight of it all threatened to crush her. He admired her strength, but more than that, he respected her independence. One evening, as Emily locked up her small design studio, she noticed a group of young women waiting outside. They weren't clients. They were strangers. "We just wanted to thank you," one of them said, her voice trembling, "for showing us that we don't have to stay silent." Tears stung Emily's eyes, but this time they were tears of healing. She realized her story wasn't just her own anymore. She carried the voices of countless women who had suffered in silence. And by rebuilding her life, she gave them permission to rebuild theirs too. Emily Carter was no longer the abandoned bride. She was an artist, a businesswoman, a mother-to-be, and a survivor. And as she turned off the lights in her studio that night, she knew this was only the beginning of the empire she would build. Not from betrayal, but from strength. Adrian Blackwell was not a man used to losing. For years, he had dominated boardrooms, crushed competitors, and bent people to his will with money and influence. But after Emily's public exposure, he became something he had never been before: vulnerable. His empire was collapsing. The board stripped him of his CEO title, pushing him aside as shareholders demanded accountability. His name disappeared from the glossy magazine covers that once worshipped him. Invitations to elite parties dried up. Even his so-called friends stopped answering his calls. For weeks, Adrian lived in denial. He told himself the scandal would pass, that Emily would come crawling back once she realized she couldn't survive without him. "She's just playing victim," he sneered one night, staring at his reflection in the darkened windows of his penthouse. "She'll beg to return." But she didn't. Instead, Emily's name grew brighter while his dimmed. The media celebrated her transformation, her design studio was thriving, and her story had become a beacon for women across the country. Adrian seethed as he watched clips of her cutting ribbons at charity events, her hand protectively cradling her belly. She looked happy. She looked free. That was what enraged him most, her freedom. Desperation pushed him into reckless choices. He began showing up unannounced at her apartment, pounding on the door late at night. "Emily, open up, we need to talk." His voice was raw, desperate, no longer the smooth confidence he once wielded. She never answered. Instead, Ethan's security team made sure he was escorted off the property each time. Adrian turned to the press, giving interviews filled with half-truths and fake remorse. "I made mistakes," he told one reporter, his eyes glassy. "But Emily knows I love her. I just want my family back." The public wasn't fooled. His words rang hollow. And the backlash was even harsher. Headlines mocked his pleas. Blackwell begs, world laughs. But the lowest point came when Adrian tried to use the baby against her. He filed a petition in court, demanding partial custody, claiming Emily was unfit to raise the child alone. His lawyers argued that her emotional instability made her dangerous. When Emily read the documents, her hands shook with fury. For a moment, fear gnawed at her. Fear that he might succeed, that he might take away the only light in her life. But then she straightened her shoulders. Adrian had underestimated her before. He would make the same mistake again. With Ethan's support, she assembled a legal team. She didn't fight with anger. She fought with facts. Her lawyers presented evidence of Adrian's fraud, his reckless lifestyle. His affair splashed across headlines. The judge's gavel fell swiftly, dismissing Adrian's petition with prejudice. Emily walked out of the courthouse that day with her head high, paparazzi shouting her name. Adrian trailed behind, his face red with humiliation. He had tried to weaponize her child, and he had lost. That night, Emily sat by the window of her apartment, her hand on her belly. She whispered softly, "He won't touch you. Not now. Not ever." Across the city, Adrian poured himself another glass of whiskey, drowning in bitterness. For the first time in his life, he realized the truth. Emily was no longer his to control. And the more he tried to claw his way back, the more the world turned to Emily, leaving him alone in the ruins of his own making. For weeks, Vanessa Liu had stayed out of sight. After the wedding scandal, she disappeared from the public eye, avoiding the flashing cameras and vicious headlines. She told herself it was temporary, that Adrian would clean up the mess as he always did, and then she could step back into his life once the dust settled. But this time, Adrian wasn't the untouchable titan she had fallen for. He was sinking fast, and Vanessa had no intention of going down with him. She had always been ambitious. That was why she caught Adrian's attention in the first place. Her hunger for power matched his arrogance. But while Adrian thought she loved him, Vanessa was playing her own game. She didn't want to be his mistress forever. She wanted influence, wealth, and her own seat at the table. When Adrian's empire crumbled, she saw an opportunity to trade loyalty for survival. One evening, Vanessa walked into a private restaurant downtown. Waiting for her was a man she once despised, an investor Adrian had humiliated in a deal years earlier. "You wanted proof of Adrian's corruption?" she asked, sliding a sleek flash drive across the table. "Everything you need is here." The man raised a brow. "And why would you betray him now?" Vanessa leaned back, sipping her wine with a smile. "Because the king is falling, and I don't plan to be dragged down with him." The investor chuckled. "Clever girl, but you realize once this gets out, you're finished too." Vanessa's smile faltered, just slightly. She thought she could outsmart everyone, but she hadn't calculated how much the world already despised her. To the public, she wasn't a victim, she was a willing accomplice. The scarlet woman who strutted into a billionaire's wedding wearing red and daring the world to watch. When the files she leaked hit the media, the backlash was immediate. Adrian was destroyed further, yes, but Vanessa's name was dragged through the mud alongside his. Blackwell's mistress strikes again. Vanessa Liu, from ambition to infamy. No one trusts a traitor. She tried to spin it, giving interviews where she painted herself as another pawn in Adrian's game. "I was manipulated," she said tearfully on live television. "I believed he loved me." But the crocodile tears didn't convince anyone. People remembered her smirk in the ballroom, the way she clung to Adrian's arm in front of his pregnant bride. No amount of acting could erase that image. Even her career in corporate events evaporated overnight. Clients canceled contracts. Former colleagues refused to answer her calls. She had gambled everything on Adrian's power, and now she had nothing. And Adrian? When he learned Vanessa had betrayed him, his fury was volcanic. He stormed into her apartment, demanding answers, only to find it empty. She had fled the city days earlier, leaving him to choke on the smoke of his ruined empire. But Vanessa's escape didn't save her. paparazzi tracked her to Los Angeles, where she was caught working at a low-end PR firm, stripped of the glamour she once flaunted. The woman who had dreamed of being a queen was reduced to anonymity, her name now synonymous with betrayal. Emily read the headlines one morning and felt a strange calm. She didn't celebrate Vanessa's downfall. She didn't need to. Life had a way of exposing the truth. Vanessa had thought she could build a future on lies and ambition, but in the end, she was just another casualty of Adrian's destruction. And as Vanessa faded into obscurity, the world turned its gaze back to Emily, the woman who rose while they both fell. In the weeks that followed Vanessa's disappearance, Emily's name didn't fade from the headlines. It grew stronger. But unlike Adrian and Vanessa, her story wasn't one of scandal anymore. It was one of survival, courage, and transformation. At first, she resisted the spotlight. She turned down television interviews, ignored book deal offers, and avoided late-night hosts who begged her to share her side of the story. She wanted to live quietly, to focus on her pregnancy and her design studio. But silence couldn't shield her from the tidal wave of attention. Across the country, women wrote to her. Handwritten letters arrived in bundles. Emails flooded her inbox. Messages poured across social media. Some were from wives who had endured betrayal, others from daughters who had watched their mothers suffer in silence. You gave me the courage to leave. Because of you, I finally spoke up. You showed me I'm not alone. Emily realized something important. Her pain had given her a voice, and that voice was now theirs too. She decided to use it. It began with a single speech at a local women's shelter, where she had been volunteering quietly. Standing before a small crowd of women who carried their own scars, Emily spoke from the heart. We cannot control how others betray us, she said, her voice steady, but we can control how we rise from it. Strength doesn't mean we never break. It means we refuse to stay broken. The video went viral within hours. Millions watched, millions shared, millions cried. News outlets picked it up, calling her the voice of resilience. Invitations poured in. Conferences, charity events, empowerment summits. Emily, the once silenced bride, was now a beacon of strength. Her design studio grew alongside her influence. Clients specifically sought her out, not just for her creativity, but for what she represented. She began specializing in events that carried meaning, fundraisers for shelters, galas for education, celebrations that gave back. Each event reflected her journey. Beauty born from pain, strength carved from loss. But what surprised her most was how natural it felt. For years, Adrian had told her she was too soft, too emotional, too naive. Now those very qualities became her power. Her vulnerability made people trust her. Her authenticity drew them in. She wasn't trying to be perfect. She was proving that imperfection could still shine. Her sister Sophie watched with awe. You're becoming more than a designer, Em. You're becoming a leader. Emily smiled softly, her hand resting on her belly. I'm just becoming who I was always meant to be. The media dubbed her the Unbroken Bride. It wasn't a title she asked for, but she embraced it. Not for herself, but for the women who saw their own stories in hers. One evening, as she prepared notes for a keynote speech at a women's leadership conference, Ethan stopped by her studio. You realize, he said, his tone half teasing, half admiring, you've become more powerful than Adrian ever was. And you did it without lying, without stepping on anyone. You did it just by being you. Emily looked up from her notes, her eyes clear. That's the difference, isn't it? He built an empire on fear. I'm building mine on hope. And as the applause of millions grew louder with each passing week, Emily Carter stepped fully into her new role. Not just as a survivor, but as a symbol of empowerment for a world that desperately needed her voice. Adrian Blackwell had once lived in the clouds, towering above the world on skyscraper balconies, sipping champagne worth more than most people's yearly salaries. Now he lived in shadows. The penthouse that once buzzed with parties and glittering guests was silent, its marble floors littered with empty bottles and unopened bills. The blinds stayed drawn, the city skyline hidden behind dust and darkness. The man who once commanded boardrooms now spent his mornings staring blankly at the television, watching reruns of his own downfall on news channels that never tired of replaying his humiliation. Blackwell Enterprises had cut him off completely. The board forced him out, freezing his accounts as investigators uncovered layers of fraud and manipulation. His assets were seized, his properties repossessed. Lawsuits piled higher than his bar tabs. His so-called friends vanished first. The same men who had once cheered him on the golf course now ignored his calls. The women who once clung to his arm blocked his number. Even Vanessa, the mistress he had once promised the world, betrayed him and disappeared. Adrian was left with nothing but the echo of his own arrogance. At first, he fought. He stormed into board meetings uninvited, demanding his position back. Security escorted him out. He threatened investors, but they laughed in his face. He tried to manipulate the press with crocodile tears, but every word only fueled the fire of ridicule. As weeks turned into months, his fight drained away. His hair grew unkempt, his once perfect suits replaced by wrinkled shirts. The confident smirk that had once defined him disappeared, leaving behind only bitterness. But the worst blow came when the courts officially dismissed his custody petition. He had hoped to use Emily's child as leverage, to cling to some shred of control. Instead, the judge's ruling painted him as unfit, a danger to the very family he once pretended to cherish. The news spread instantly. Blackwell declared unfit father. Court chooses Emily. The humiliation was unbearable. One night, Adrian stumbled through the streets of Manhattan, drunk and disheveled. People recognized him, but instead of admiration, their eyes held contempt. A man who had once been envied was now pitied, mocked, dismissed. He overheard whispers. "Is that really Adrian Blackwell? Hard to believe that's the billionaire." Serves him right. The words cut deeper than any lawsuit. He returned to his penthouse, sinking into the leather chair that once symbolized his power. For hours, he sat there, staring at the skyline he used to own. Now, it belonged to others. Competitors had taken his contracts, rivals claimed his influence, and Emily, stood at the center of it all, shining brighter than he ever had. Adrian clenched his fists, fury burning through his veins. "She did this," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "She ruined me." But even as he said it, a darker truth gnawed at him. Emily hadn't ruined him. He had ruined himself. His greed, his arrogance, his lies, they were the real weapons that destroyed him. For the first time in years, Adrian felt something unfamiliar. Regret. Not just for losing Emily, not just for losing power, but for realizing too late that he had traded love for ambition and ended up with nothing. The once mighty billionaire was now a ghost, wandering the ruins of his own empire. And as Emily's star continued to rise, Adrian Blackwell faced the truth that terrified him most. He was no longer feared, no longer admired, no longer relevant. He was nothing. As winter melted into spring, Emily's world shifted once more. Her belly had grown round and full, a constant reminder that every step she took, every decision she made, was no longer just for herself. The child inside her kicked with strength, as if impatient to meet the world. Each movement was a promise of new beginnings. Her days were filled with both exhaustion and hope. Mornings began with soft sunlight spilling through her apartment windows, where she sat quietly with a cup of tea, journaling her thoughts for her unborn child. One day, she wrote, "You'll read these words and know that you were the reason I stood tall when the world wanted me to fall." At her design studio, business thrived more than ever. Clients lined up not just for her creativity, but for her story. Emily poured her soul into each project, designing with themes of resilience and rebirth. The women's shelter she had decorated months earlier became a landmark of hope, and soon she was asked to design spaces for other charities across the country. But it wasn't only her career that grew. Her influence as a voice for women multiplied. She was invited to speak at universities, community centers, and conferences. Each time she stood before an audience, she placed her hand on her belly and spoke not just as a designer or a survivor, but as a mother. Strength, she told them, isn't measured by what we endure alone. It's measured by the love we carry forward, even when the world tries to take it from us. Her younger sister Sophie became her closest companion, attending doctor appointments, helping prepare the nursery, painting soft stars and clouds on the walls. "This baby is going to grow up surrounded by love," Sophie said one night as they arranged tiny clothes in drawers. Emily smiled, tears warming her eyes. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't frighten her. Ethan continued to hover at the edges of her life, steady and reliable. He offered help without expectation, protection without control. Though unspoken, a quiet bond grew between them. When Emily doubted herself, Ethan reminded her, "You've already done the hardest part. You survived. Now you get to live." Still, in her quiet moments, fear crept in. Would she be enough for her child? Could she truly raise them without the shadow of Adrian's betrayal haunting them? She fought those thoughts by preparing. She attended parenting classes, surrounded herself with supportive women, and leaned on her growing community. The night before her baby shower, Emily sat alone in the nursery. The crib was ready, the shelves lined with storybooks, the walls painted in soft blues and whites. She traced her fingers over the crib's edge, whispering, "You will never know the lies, only the truth. You will never see weakness, only love." Tears fell, but they were not of sorrow. They were of release. For years, she had carried pain in silence. Now she carried life, love, and legacy. And as she placed her hand over her heart and her belly, Emily Carter knew that the empire she was building wasn't made of money or power. It was made of love. And no betrayal could ever take that away. Weeks after the birth, Emily found herself transformed in more ways than she imagined. Motherhood reshaped her nights into sleepless hours, her days into tender rhythms of feeding, rocking, and whispering lullabies. Yet with every cry, every tiny grasp of her baby's fingers, she felt her heart heal. The baby became her anchor. The shadows of betrayal no longer haunted her the same way. Each time she looked into her child's eyes, she saw not the lies of Adrian Blackwell, but the truth of her own strength. "You are my second chance," she whispered during quiet nights, rocking the infant against her chest. Her healing extended beyond her home. Invitations poured in. This time, she chose carefully. Emily agreed to one national interview, not for the gossip but for the message. Sitting in a modest blue dress with her baby resting in a crib beside her, she faced the cameras. "I didn't survive because I'm extraordinary," she said gently. "I survived because I chose not to stay silent. Pain will break us, yes, but it can also shape us. And sometimes, the best revenge is not anger, it's living with dignity and peace." The audience was silent, then erupted in applause. Clips of her words spread like wildfire, reaching millions who found strength in her story. Social media turned her speech into a rallying cry. Women posted their own survival stories under the hashtag #HealingWithEmily. At her design studio, Emily continued to weave her pain into art. Every event she created carried symbolism: rebirth, light after darkness, strength through community. Clients respected her not just for her skill, but for her authenticity. She wasn't designing spaces anymore. She was creating sanctuaries of hope. Her sister Sophie often reminded her how far she had come. "Do you realize," Sophie said one evening while rocking the baby, "that people see you as more than just a survivor? They see you as proof that broken pieces can be built into something stronger." Emily smiled, her eyes misty. "I don't want to be remembered for the pain. I want to be remembered for how I rose from it." Even Ethan, who had been quietly supportive throughout, noticed the change. "You've closed the wounds," he told her one night after a charity gala. "And instead of scars, you've made art." Emily didn't reply immediately. She glanced at her sleeping baby in the stroller beside them. Then she looked back at Ethan. "I didn't heal alone. I had help. My mother's memory, my sister's love, and your faith in me. That's what carried me." Her healing was not just personal, it was public. By embracing her story, she transformed it from a wound into a weapon, from humiliation into empowerment. Adrian's betrayal no longer defined her. Her resilience did. That night, as she stood on her balcony holding her baby, the city lights flickering below, Emily felt peace. She breathed deeply, the cool air brushing her skin, the heartbeat of her child steady against her chest. For the first time since the betrayal, she wasn't surviving anymore. She was living. And in that simple truth, Emily Carter finally found her freedom. Adrian Blackwell's end did not come with explosions or fireworks. It came quietly, like a flame suffocated by its own smoke. Months after Emily's rise, Adrian was a ghost in the city he once ruled. The penthouse was sold to pay off debts, his cars repossessed, his name blacklisted from the circles he once dominated. Once hailed as the golden billionaire, he was now a cautionary tale whispered at dinner tables. "Did you hear what happened to Adrian Blackwell? Betrayed his pregnant fiancé and lost everything. He wandered through bars at night, a shadow of the man who once commanded empires. People recognized him, but not with envy. only with pity. His downfall was complete, and worst of all, no one cared anymore. Emily, meanwhile, was stepping into a life brighter than she ever dreamed. Her baby thrived, growing stronger each day, their laughter filling her home with light. Her design studio expanded into a full agency, employing women who, like her, had once been underestimated. She created not just events, but opportunities, transforming pain into possibility for others. Her influence stretched beyond her work. She founded a non-profit organization for women rebuilding their lives after betrayal or abuse, offering counseling, housing support, and job training. The foundation's motto, "Never Broken," echoed the words she once whispered to herself in the darkest night. One evening, Emily attended the opening of a new shelter her foundation funded. Reporters surrounded her, snapping photos of her in a simple yet elegant gown, her baby cradled in her arms. A journalist asked, "Emily, do you ever regret what happened with Adrian?" She smiled softly, her eyes calm. "Regret? No. Without that betrayal, I would not be here. Without that pain, I would not have built this strength. I don't regret what he did. I only regret how long I believed I wasn't enough." The crowd fell silent, moved by her words. Then applause rose, loud and genuine, echoing the admiration of a world that now saw Emily not as a victim, but as a symbol. Across the city, Adrian watched the interview from a dingy hotel room. The television flickered, Emily's face glowing with pride, her baby nestled against her chest. He threw the remote at the screen, shattering the glass, but the image lingered in his mind. He had lost her forever, not just as a woman, but as the life he might have shared. Alone, he poured himself another drink. That was his legacy. Empty glasses, burned bridges, and a name that had turned to dust. Emily's future soared while his dwindled into nothingness. Back at the shelter, Emily held her baby close as the night wound down. She looked out at the crowd, survivors, supporters, women who now believed in themselves because she had dared to stand. She whispered to her child, "This is our world now, not built on lies, not on betrayal, but on truth, dignity, and love." The music swelled, laughter filled the hall, and Emily felt something she hadn't in years: complete peace. Adrian Blackwell's story had ended in ashes. But Emily Carter's story was only beginning, and it was brighter, stronger, and more beautiful than any fairy tale she had once believed in. So that's how Emily's story comes to an end, my wonderful friends. And if you're still here with me right now, it probably means something in her journey touched your heart too. Maybe it reminded you of a moment you thought you couldn't survive. Or maybe it showed you that even in betrayal, there's a way forward. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Isn't that exactly what Emily did? She couldn't control Adrian's betrayal, but she could control how she rose from it. And Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." That's the heart of healing. Life will break us sometimes, but like Emily, we can choose dignity over despair, truth over lies, and love over fear. If her story leaves you with one lesson, let it be this: you are never powerless. If this touched you even a little, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to our channel, because we'll keep bringing stories that remind you of the strength already inside you.
Welcome to our channel. In the final moments of this captivating story, Zachary, who once left Amy and his unborn child for a high-stakes merger, suddenly appears at an opulent charity event. His desperate plea to meet his brilliant son, Toby, creates a wave of tense emotion, one that reveals the high price of sacrificing family for ambition. If you're curious about how Amy responds after all she's overcome, you won't want to miss a single detail of this roller coaster drama. Be sure to listen to the entire story to see how everything truly ends. And while you're here, don't forget to hit the subscribe button to stay updated on more enthralling tales like this. We'd love to hear your personal opinions, so drop a comment below and let us know where you're tuning in from. Your support helps us continue sharing powerful, life-changing stories that keep you coming back for more. Zachary Warren stood in the grand kitchen of the penthouse he shared with Amy Lawson, staring blankly at a pregnancy test resting on the gleaming marble countertop. Overhead, lights reflected off the surface, making the two pink lines appear even more vivid. He swallowed hard as he loosened the designer tie around his neck, the tension in the air so thick it felt almost tangible. Across from him stood Amy, exhausted but hopeful, still wearing her pale blue medical scrubs from a grueling shift at the hospital. She had dashed home the moment she could to surprise him with what she assumed would be joyful, life-altering news. I'm pregnant, Amy managed, her usually confident voice trembling at the edges. She searched Zachary's face, hoping to see a smile or at least some flicker of excitement. Instead, his expression remained unreadable, his gaze sliding away to the floor. Zach, we can figure this out together, right? Her question hung in the tense silence. Finally, he cleared his throat. Amy, I can't, he said in an oddly detached tone. My company is expanding, and in less than a month, Warren Innovations will merge with Chen Industries. Most of our operations are moving to Singapore. I was going to break the news to you over dinner. Amy's eyebrows shot up. Singapore? That's halfway around the world. But we can go together. We'll work it out. After all, this baby is ours. She was almost pleading, unable to accept the finality creeping into his voice. Zachary inhaled deeply, picking invisible lint off his perfectly ironed suit coat. That's just it. I'm marrying Vanessa Chen. It's already arranged. I'm sorry, Amy, but this is bigger than us. It's a business deal, part of the merger. I need to do what's right for the company. Shock rippled through Amy like an electric current. The words hit her harder than she ever thought possible. In a surreal instant, she realized the Zachary Warren she'd fallen in love with, the man who had once proposed to her under a canopy of stars, was gone. His eyes lacked warmth, reflecting only the cold glimmer of corporate ambition. She tried to force herself to speak, but all that emerged was a weak, disbelieving whisper. Vanessa Chen, your investor's daughter? Since when? How? He shook his head. It's not what you think. It's just business, an arrangement. You'll be taken care of, I promise. The lawyers have already drafted paperwork. The penthouse is yours until you decide your next steps. Amy stepped closer, searching for any sign of the man who used to memorize her favorite songs and bring her midnight coffees during her long shifts. Zach, look me in the eye and tell me everything we built, everything we dreamed about, meant nothing to you. For a moment, his face faltered, but whatever softness he might have felt was quickly replaced by a guarded, mechanical resolve. I'm sorry, was all he could muster. Then he grabbed his briefcase and disappeared through the door, leaving Amy in stunned silence. She stood there for a minute, barely registering the persistent beep of the pregnancy test. She felt hollow, like someone had just carved out her heart. A swirl of phone notifications interrupted her shock. A text from Linda Mills, her best friend and fellow resident, plus a flood of business headlines heralding the upcoming Warren Chen merger. Yet the pang that made her dash to the bathroom was more physical, a wave of nausea so strong she barely made it in time. Kneeling on the cool tiles, she pressed her palm over her stomach. Her breathing was ragged as the reality of her situation crashed over her. In a single night, she had lost the man she loved and watched the future they'd planned to go up in corporate smoke. Still, she heard the faint buzz of her pager from the hospital, calling her back for an emergency operation. With trembling hands, she splashed cold water on her face and steadied herself. I'm Dr. Lawson, she muttered to her reflection, trying to hold on to a semblance of composure. I can do this. I have to. She grabbed her keys and jogged to the elevator, already texting Linda that she was headed to the OR. Her mind spun, trying to reconcile what had just happened with the demands of her profession. As the elevator doors slid open in the lobby, she took one last shaky breath. Her personal world might be collapsing, but patients' lives depended on her. One step at a time, she murmured, stepping into the cool morning air. The next morning, Amy stood outside an ATM near the hospital, swiping her card for the fourth unsuccessful time. Access denied, the screen informed her. With labored calm, she tried once more, but the result was the same. Overnight, her entire financial lifeline had vanished. Her mind raced as she leaned her forehead against the cold metal, exhaustion mingling with creeping panic. Before she could gather her thoughts, Linda Mills arrived in a flurry of pastel scrubs and a determined expression, 2 paper cups of coffee balanced precariously in one hand. Hey, you look like death warmed over, Linda said, thrusting a cup at Amy. Then, catching sight of the ATM screen, she added, "Wait, don't tell me." Amy sighed. "All my accounts are gone. I can't pay for anything. And I don't even think my keys to the penthouse still work." Karum. She showed Linda a string of notifications on her phone. Closed accounts, canceled credit cards, removed signatory privileges. The magnitude of Zachary's calculated move sank in. "Good grief," Linda muttered, brows knitting. "This is unbelievable. You're a joint owner on most of those accounts. He can't just lock you out like that." "But he did," Amy replied bitterly, taking a cautious sip of the coffee before recoiling. Morning sickness had turned her stomach sour. Shaking away the discomfort, she forced herself to focus. I didn't even get to gather my personal things from the penthouse." Linda's deep brown eyes flashed with fierce protectiveness. "Come stay with me. I've got a spare room, and Jenny just moved out. You can't sleep on call at the hospital every night." Amy swallowed hard, tears pricking her eyelids, but she refused to break down in the middle of the busy lobby. "I'll pay you back. I promise," she whispered, already overwhelmed by her friend's generosity. Linda looped an arm through Amy's. "You know it's not about money. Let's get you a new bank account today and talk to someone who can help. My cousin Ben is a lawyer specializing in exactly this kind of mess. We'll figure out how to deal with your ex-fiancé." The word ex-fiancé felt like a physical punch. Despite everything, part of Amy still couldn't believe Zachary had so abruptly turned into a stranger. Only a few weeks ago, they had been excitedly discussing baby names, or so she thought. Now he was across the ocean, presumably planning a high-profile wedding with Vanessa Chen. Her phone buzzed again. A news alert popped up. Warren Innovations to merge with Chen Industries. Wedding of the year expected in Singapore. She stared at the picture of Zachary exiting a luxury car in Singapore. Vanessa's arm looped through his. Her bright lipstick matched the color of his tie, giving the image a sickening sense of coordination. She forced herself to close the article before heartbreak consumed her. "Come on," Linda said gently, steering Amy away from the unyielding ATM. "We'll take this step by step. First, let's open a new checking account. Then, we'll get you moved into my place. After that, maybe, just maybe, you can allow yourself to be excited about bringing new life into the world." A wave of renewed nausea hit Amy, but she nodded bravely. "You're right. My patient is the baby now, and the baby needs me to be stable." "You've got this." Linda gave her shoulder a supportive squeeze. "Just remember, you're an amazing doctor, one of the best in the residency. If you can mend broken arteries, you can definitely mend a broken heart." As the two doctors hurried through the hospital corridor, a passing nurse signaled to Amy. "Dr. Lawson, there's an emergency down in pediatrics. They paged you." Amy's grip on the coffee cup tightened. This was her life now, a world of surgeries, unstoppable responsibilities, and a baby growing inside her. Casting one last glance at the closed ATM, she let out a steadying breath. "I'm on my way," she told the nurse. Then to Linda, "After I save a life, I'll meet you at your place." "Thank you." Linda watched Amy stride purposefully toward the pediatric wing, a glimmer of admiration in her eyes. If Zachary Warren thought he could keep Amy Lawson down, he had no idea just how formidable she could become, especially when fighting for someone smaller and more vulnerable than herself. Time became a blur of long shifts, constant morning sickness, and seemingly endless legal paperwork. 3 months into her pregnancy, Amy found herself in Linda's living room, rifling through a thick stack of documents from Zachary's attorneys. Linda had a sprawling array of medical journals on the coffee table, but Amy's attention was drawn to a magazine cover featuring Zachary and Vanessa under the bold headline, "Singapore's Elite Power Couple." Amy swallowed against the knot in her throat. Despite her newfound determination, every fresh glimpse of Zachary reopening wounds she was trying so hard to stitch shut. Her gaze drifted to a separate set of papers that felt infinitely more hopeful. Her approval letter for a hospital-funded research project on minimally invasive pediatric surgical techniques. "Focus on that one," Linda urged, gently pulling the magazine from Amy's grasp. "Not on those two smiling on the cover. Look, the hospital believes in you, so much that they're funding your project. That's huge, Amy." Amy nodded, attempting a small smile. "They told me I'll be leading my own research team. Never would have imagined that a few months ago. She glanced down at her belly, where a soft flutter reminded her of the life developing inside. I'm going to do this for me and for the baby. Linda checked her phone. Also, I got confirmation from Ben. He's reviewing those new documents. He says not to worry. Zachary might think he's unstoppable, but there are limits, even for a millionaire, especially one who left his pregnant fiancé for a business arrangement. Amy exhaled slowly, relief mingling with gratitude. I owe you both so much, thank you. Linda placed a hand on Amy's shoulder. Family isn't always about blood. You saved my niece's life when she had that complicated infection, and you were just a second-year resident then. I'm just returning the favor. Before Amy could say more, her phone buzzed again. This time it was Harriet Warren, Zachary's mother, who had been trying to reach her at least once a week since the breakup. Amy frowned, her finger hovering over the ignore button. She had no idea whose side Harriet might be on. She keeps calling, Amy murmured, showing Linda the screen. I haven't picked up because, well, I don't know what she wants. Linda shrugged. Sometimes parents aren't aligned with their adult children's decisions. She might genuinely want to help, or she might just be doing damage control. Hard to say. Amy declined the call. If it was that important, she'd leave me a message. Just then, a text came in from Harriet. Please let me help you. This isn't the future I wanted for you or my grandchild. Her heart twisted. It was the first time anyone had referred to her baby as Harriet's grandchild. How could Harriet claim such a relationship when Zachary had severed all ties so coldly? The phone beeped again, a news alert about Warren Innovations' rising stock prices credited to the Singapore expansion. Amy felt a flicker of bitterness. While he's out there finalizing the biggest merger of his life, I'm learning how to survive paycheck to paycheck. Linda's eyes gleamed with something almost mischievous. He's not the only one who understands investments. The shares that Ben helped you acquire have grown too. If you keep funneling some money there, eventually you'll have leverage. Might take a couple of years, but it's possible. A firm knock on the door interrupted them. The courier arrived with another bulky envelope from Zachary's legal team. Rolling her eyes, Amy set it aside for Ben. She was learning quickly that responding immediately rarely did her any favors. Let me guess, she said wryly. More settlement agreements, more NDAs, more hush money checks. She refused them all, determined to handle the pregnancy on her own. If Zachary wanted a clean break, then she'd give him precisely that. No free passes. Linda took the envelope. I'll get this to my cousin. Meanwhile, let's plan your baby shower. A small one, just with hospital staff. Amy attempted another smile, though tears threatened. I never imagined celebrating like this. But you're right, life goes on. In the corner, a small bookshelf caught her eye. On it sat a single item from the penthouse, an ultrasound photo she'd retrieved on her last frantic visit to gather personal things. Her baby was already forming tiny fingers, a tiny heart. All the more reason, she reminded herself, to keep forging ahead. On a brisk morning nearly 6 months into her pregnancy, Amy entered the operating room for what she expected to be a routine pediatric appendectomy. Fate, however, had other plans. Midway through the procedure, she felt a sudden, intense pressure in her abdomen, followed by an overwhelming contraction. Her breathing hitched, but she forced herself to maintain focus on the child's open incision. Nurses exchanged worried looks. Dr. Lawson, are you sure you're okay? One of them asked, glancing nervously at the monitor tracking Amy's vitals. Her heart rate was skyrocketing. I'm fine, Amy gritted out, meticulously completing the final sutures. Her vision swam for a moment, but she steadied herself. We need to close up properly, then I'll... Another contraction rippled through her, stronger this time. Linda, who had rushed in upon hearing the commotion, quickly stepped forward and placed a supportive hand on Amy's elbow. You're in active labor, let me finish. Reluctantly, Amy nodded, stepping back with trembling hands still gloved. All right, you close, she said, her voice tight with both pain and professional urgency. I can guide from the sidelines. Within half an hour, the child was out of danger, whisked to recovery. Meanwhile, Amy found herself being wheeled down the corridor, breath coming in ragged gasps. She'd officially gone into labor at 39 weeks, technically right on time, but definitely not under ideal circumstances. Waves of anxious excitement and leftover adrenaline from the OR flooded her mind. In the labor and delivery suite, the hospital staff scrambled to accommodate this high-profile resident, who also happened to be one of their most respected pediatric surgeons. Monitors were attached and an IV line was started. Linda stayed by Amy's side, calmly coaching her through contractions. Despite the chaos, a small surge of pride lit Amy's heart when the nurse told her the child she operated on was stabilizing. Even in the throes of labor, she found solace in knowing she had saved a life. But as the contractions intensified, her thoughts drifted to the one person who wasn't there, Zachary. She tried not to let bitterness steal her focus, but it was nearly impossible. How could he forsake both mother and child? The pang of betrayal fueled her anger, which blended with the physical pain tearing through her body. Then came a rush of activity. Lights glared. Medical staff shouted instructions that Amy herself normally would have given. When she heard the urgent beep of fetal monitors, she tensed, but the obstetrician reassured her that everything looked normal. It was just time to push. Despite her professional composure, Amy felt tears slip free as the enormity of motherhood bore down on her. Several hours later, her son arrived with a healthy cry, a perfect, wailing manifestation of new life. The moment the nurses placed him into Amy's arms, all the tension coiled inside her unwound. She stared in awe at the tiny face peering back at her. Linda stood at her bedside, unable to hide her tears of joy. "He's beautiful," she whispered, reaching down to brush the baby's soft hair. "Thank you for everything," Amy managed, voice hoarse and laden with emotion. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Linda gently patted Amy's shoulder. "I'm honored to be here. Now what are you going to call him?" Amy looked at her son, thinking of the life they would forge together, just the two of them. "Toby," she whispered. "Toby Lawson." The baby whimpered, and Amy instinctively cradled him closer, cherishing the closeness of the tiny, warm body. In that moment, she could almost pretend that Zachary was just a faint memory, a cautionary tale. As Toby blinked up at her, she felt something anchored deep in her soul, an unbreakable resolve to protect and provide for him at any cost. "Welcome to the world, Toby," she whispered, pressing a tender kiss to his forehead. "It's you and me, kid." Her phone, resting on a side table, buzzed with more notifications from Harriet. Another volley of calls and texts. Amy ignored them. Right now, only one person deserved her full attention, and that person was nestled in her arms, offering a fragile new beginning she intended to make the most of. 2 years passed in a whirlwind of sleepless nights, frantic childcare arrangements, and an ever-growing reputation for Dr. Amy Lawson as a powerhouse in pediatric surgery. Toby, bright-eyed and inquisitive, grew into a bundle of boundless energy. He spent his days tottering around Linda's apartment, curious about everything from stethoscopes to the shapes of puzzle pieces. On a Saturday afternoon, Amy found herself in the modest kitchen, preparing Toby's lunch while glancing at a stack of medical journals on the table. New accolades had started to trickle in for her pioneering surgical techniques, and she was scheduled to present her research at a prestigious conference soon. She still wore a slight limp from being on her feet too long the night before, but nothing dimmed her determination. Toby toddled in, clutching a large jigsaw puzzle piece shaped like a dinosaur's head. "Mommy done," he announced, proudly displaying his completed puzzle map of prehistoric creatures. He was unusually advanced for a toddler, something Amy suspected stemmed from both paternal and maternal intelligence. She plastered on a wide smile, scooping Toby into her arms. "You're getting so good at that," she cooed, ruffling his curls. Linda appeared, rummaging through the fridge for a bottle of water. "He's a smart little guy. He recognizes letters, shapes, and even tries to pronounce the medical terms he hears." Setting the water aside, she opened a worn file folder. "By the way, we got new lab results back for your valve repair research. Preliminary results look amazing." Amy sighed in relief, balancing Toby on her hip. That's one more step toward a surgical revolution in pediatric cardio. She felt a surge of gratitude for everything that had aligned to bring her to this point. Her supportive colleagues, Linda's unwavering help, and Toby's simple but powerful presence. Just then, Linda's gaze darted to a small TV perched on the counter. Business news scrolled across the screen, announcing in bold letters, "Warren Innovations in Crisis." CEO Zachary Warren and wife Vanessa Chen, rumored to be divorcing. Amy froze, Toby's weight suddenly feeling heavier. While she'd expected things might fall apart eventually, she hadn't realized it would be so public. Linda quickly muted the TV, but Amy's eyes were already drawn to a photograph of Zachary leaving a corporate building, looking haggard. His once immaculate hair was windswept, and lines of stress furrowed his brow. Apparently, that big merger wasn't everything he hoped it would be, Linda said, sounding more matter-of-fact than gossipy. You okay? Amy cleared her throat, tilting Toby so she wouldn't have to see the TV. Yes, I'm fine, she lied. Truthfully, her heart pounded at the sight of his face, conjuring memories of that fateful day he walked away from her and Toby's future. But she was determined not to let it derail her. He made his decisions. Let him deal with the consequences. Toby squirmed, reaching for his dinosaur puzzle piece on the table. Amy set him down gently. As he ambled off, Linda touched Amy's arm. It's just speculation, but there's talk of a shareholder revolt. You know, if you hadn't sold those shares— I sold enough to sustain us, Amy corrected softly. I kept a sizable portion. Not enough to control anything, but maybe enough to matter someday. Linda studied her face. Then we wait. Maybe that day will come. Amy nodded, though her attention was already back on Toby, who had trotted into the living room to line up puzzle pieces in perfect geometric patterns. She felt a pang of guilt, wondering if Toby would ever meet the father whose eyes he'd inherited. But that regret was tempered by a fierce conviction. Toby deserved better than what Zachary had once offered. Money without genuine love or involvement. A chirp from Amy's phone indicated an email, an invitation to be a keynote speaker at a major pediatric conference. She accepted without hesitation. This was her moment, to step out of Zachary Warren's shadow entirely. Okay, Toby, she said, strolling into the living room. It's you and me, kiddo. Let's show the world what we can do. 3 years into motherhood, Amy found her star rising. The national press dubbed her the next frontier in pediatric surgery, and invitations to speak at conferences around the globe poured in. Toby, now 3, had become a pint-sized genius, quietly astonishing everyone with his knack for memorizing scientific terms. One crisp evening, Amy and Toby arrived at the plush grand ballroom of Henderson Memorial Hospital, the site of an annual fundraising gala. People in glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos milled about, sipping champagne and chatting beneath crystal chandeliers. Amy had been invited as an honored guest, recognized for her surgical innovations. She wore a floor-length emerald gown that brought out the green flecks in her eyes, while Toby sported a mini tux that made him look both adorable and precociously serious. As they made their entrance, camera flashes momentarily disoriented Amy. Toby clung to her hand. She glanced around for Linda, who was supposed to meet them, only to freeze when she spotted a face she hadn't expected to see. Zachary Warren. He stood near the open bar, looking older but still undeniably recognizable in his sharp suit. Their eyes locked across the distance, and Amy felt her breath catch. She instinctively tightened her hold on Toby. Linda appeared by her side in seconds, noticing the line of Amy's gaze. He's probably here because Warren Innovations donated heavily before the scandal, she whispered, carefully positioning herself so Toby wouldn't see Zachary. Ignore him if you can. See, easier said than done, Amy thought, her heart pounding erratically. Yet she refused to let this overshadow the real purpose of the evening. She guided Toby toward the stage, where hospital administrators readied a microphone for the award presentation. Since Toby had begun stringing sentences together, he had insisted on being part of his mother's big moments. Amy found the arrangement both sweet and symbolic. He was, after all, the reason she pushed so hard to excel. The MC introduced her, lauding her new technique for repairing delicate cardiac structures in infants. Applause rippled through the room. Amy stepped up to the microphone, Toby standing beside her in his perfectly pressed little tux. Cameras flashed, capturing the image of mother and son, each exuding a quiet confidence. 3 years ago, Amy began, her voice reverberating in the hushed ballroom, I discovered how resilient children's hearts truly are, both physically and symbolically. My hope is that this new procedure will save as many young lives as possible. But I also want to thank someone who has taught me more about courage than any medical textbook ever could." She glanced down at Toby, who gazed up at her with bright eyes. "My son, Toby." At that, a gentle wave of admiration rolled through the audience. Toby, right on cue, carefully held up the crystal award presented to his mother. "Congratulations, Mommy," he piped into the microphone, drawing a burst of charmed laughter from the crowd. From her peripheral vision, Amy caught a glimpse of Zachary, his face a portrait of shock. She felt a surge of triumph. This was the son he had never met, the brilliant child he had forfeited for corporate expedience. The applause thundered. Amy accepted the award, pressing a kiss to Toby's cheek. They stepped off the stage to a standing ovation. Linda leaned in, whispering, "He just left." Amy, placing the award on the table, gently brushed Toby's hair. "Zachary?" "Yes," Linda confirmed. "I watched him walk right out after the first wave of applause." A swirl of conflicting emotions tightened in Amy's chest. Relief, sadness, vindication. Most of all, an overriding protectiveness toward Toby. As the hospital's executive director approached to congratulate them, Amy drew Toby close. She had no intention of letting Zachary's reappearance derail the path they'd forged, one built on unconditional love rather than fleeting corporate alliances. Amid the conversations and well wishes, Toby tugged on her gown. "Mommy, can we see the fish tank again?" A huge saltwater aquarium was the gala's centerpiece. "Of course, sweetheart," Amy murmured, letting Toby lead her. She cast one last glance at the ballroom entrance, where she spotted Harriet Warren watching them from the corner. The older woman's face shone with tears and a gentle smile. Amy offered a tight nod, uncertain of Harriet's motivations but acknowledging her as Toby's grandmother. They continued onto the aquarium, Toby squealing with delight at the brightly colored fish. Life went on, and as Amy felt Toby's hand clutch hers, she knew she had already gained everything that truly mattered. Late that same night, Amy received a string of frantic messages from Harriet, who was being admitted to the hospital under an urgent oncology consultation. Linda alerted Amy first, handing her the lab results with a grave expression. "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer," Linda said quietly, sadness lacing her voice. Amy's stomach dropped. Despite her strained relationship with Harriet's son, she had no ill will toward Harriet herself. She'd been Toby's only link to that side of the family, sending him educational books and math games under the radar. Amy recalled how Harriet had once pleaded over the phone, "Please let me help you." Perhaps Harriet's brand of concern had been genuine all along. Now Harriet lay in a private hospital room, her once regal posture diminished by pain and exhaustion. When Amy stepped in, Toby in tow, Harriet's eyes lit up with recognition. "You came," she whispered, reaching for Amy's hand. "I'm your consulting doctor," Amy replied, careful to keep her tone professional. But the moment Toby toddled forward, Harriet's stern visage cracked into a watery smile. "There he is," she managed, patting the bed. Toby climbed up cautiously, wide-eyed, as Harriet lightly ruffled his curls. Harriet exhaled shakily, turning back to Amy. "I'm sorry for everything. I tried to warn Zachary, but he wouldn't listen. All he saw was the merger, the profit. I hoped he'd snap out of it before it was too late." Amy felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. Harriet's eyes brimmed with sincerity. "I appreciate that," Amy replied simply. She didn't elaborate on the heartbreak or the struggles or the lonely nights. Instead, she nodded. "Toby and I will be here. Let's focus on your treatment." But Harriet slowly shook her head. "I'm afraid it's too late for that. The metastases are advanced, and chemo is only a stopgap at this point." She reached for a folder on the bedside table. "I have instructions for transferring certain assets, including my shares in Warren Innovations. I want them to go to Toby." Amy stiffened. "Does Zachary know?" "Not yet," Harriet answered. "And I'd like to keep it that way, at least until the dust settles. The company is in free fall from the divorce scandal. Vanessa Chen is maneuvering to oust him completely. Toby's shares might become a significant factor. It's all in here." Linda entered the room then, offering Harriet some water and adjusting her IV drip. Toby, for his part, busied himself by showing Harriet a drawing he'd made of the hospital, complete with colorful hearts. Harriet's eyes shone with tears at the child's work, every inch of her face alight with a bittersweet mixture of pride and regret. After Linda ushered Toby out to the hall for a quick snack, Harriet turned back to Amy. "I have one last request," she said, voice faltering. "Let Toby visit me again. Let me be his grandmother. Even if I don't have long, I want him to remember I cared." Amy pressed her lips together, nodding. The older woman reached up to squeeze her hand with surprising strength. "And whatever you do," Harriet added, "don't underestimate the storm that's coming with Zachary's downfall." That night, after tucking Toby into bed, Amy pored over the legal documents Harriet had provided. They confirmed a direct transfer of Harriet's shares to Toby, making him a significant stakeholder in Warren Innovations. On top of that, Harriet had collected evidence pointing to potential corporate fraud during the original merger. Amy felt a twist of conflicting emotions. She had never actively sought revenge. All she'd wanted was a secure life for Toby. Now she realized she held something else entirely, the power to reshape Toby's future in ways Zachary could never have imagined. With dawn breaking, she signed the forms. Then she stood, stretching her stiff limbs, and peeked in on Toby, fast asleep, small chest rising and falling in gentle rhythm. In a few months or years, he might ask about his father. The day would come when she had to tell him the truth, but until then, she would protect him from the chaos that Harriet predicted. A year later, Harriet had passed on, leaving a lasting legacy, both financial and emotional. Toby, now 4, continued to develop at a rate that astounded teachers and doctors alike. Amy's surgical innovations were saving hundreds of children worldwide, earning her international accolades. She had multiple job offers from prestigious institutions, but remained loyal to Henderson Memorial, where Toby felt most at home. Then came the invitation that changed everything. A star-studded charity event intended to honor groundbreaking medical professionals and philanthropic donors. Amy would be receiving another award for her revolutionary pediatric heart valve design, a technique that drastically improved survival rates for newborns with congenital heart defects. The black tie gala was set at the city's premier hotel, complete with camera crews, live streaming news coverage, and the presence of dozens of top-tier donors. Stepping onto the red carpet, Amy gripped Toby's hand. He looked adorable in a custom black suit, his dark hair slicked back in an effort to appear grown up. Photographers called out for pictures, and Toby blinked at the flashing lights, still a little startled by such public attention. They made their way into the grand ballroom, which shimmered with polished floors, glittering chandeliers, and elegantly decorated tables. Banners proclaiming new expansions in pediatric medicine lined the walls. Amy greeted colleagues and supporters, all eager to congratulate her. She mentally braced herself for the possibility of running into Zachary. He was rumored to be on the guest list, having been involved in philanthropic efforts recently, perhaps in a bid to rebuild his tarnished reputation. Soon enough, the evening's host stepped onto the elevated stage, microphone in hand, to introduce Dr. Amy Lawson. Applause broke out like rolling thunder as the spotlight found her, standing near the front with Toby. Approaching the podium, she glanced across the sea of faces. Sure enough, near the back stood Zachary, his expression unreadable. She took a deep breath and began. "When I first stumbled upon the idea of forging a new technique in pediatric surgery, I was driven by necessity, tiny hearts that desperately needed solutions. Through trial and error, we found a way to give these children a fighting chance. Tonight, I want to dedicate this award to the smallest warriors I've ever known, and to my son, Toby, who inspires me every day." Toby stepped up beside her, holding a small box that contained the shimmering crystal statuette. His voice rang through the microphone, high but self-assured. "Congratulations, Mommy." His grin was contagious, eliciting laughter and cheers from the crowd. Cameras flashed, immortalizing the moment. Across the room, Amy glimpsed Zachary pressing a hand to his forehead, as though the scene was too much to bear. Within moments, he turned on his heel and left through the side door, disappearing into the night. Amy felt an odd mixture of sadness and relief flicker through her. She turned her attention back to Toby, who bounced on his toes with excitement. By the event's end, Toby had charmed nearly every guest, giving a wide-eyed explanation of how the pediatric heart valves worked. He used simple analogies, like little doorways inside the heart, as he called them. Yet his words displayed a clear intelligence that belied his young age. Reporters marveled, and Amy found herself fielding questions about her son's own future in medicine. Later, alone in the quiet hush of the post-gala corridor, Toby clutched a small plush heart given to him by one of the vendors. He and Amy waited for the car service. She felt a presence before turning to see Zachary standing behind them, disheveled and uncertain. In the hallway's subdued light, he looked as if he'd aged a decade. "Amy," he began softly, I'm sorry. I know I have no right to ask anything, but I'd like to meet Toby, even if just for a moment." Amy's mind whirled. Part of her wanted to refuse outright. Another part recognized that Toby would grow older and ask questions. She let out a shaky breath, turning to Toby. "Toby," she said gently, "this is Mr. Warren. He's someone who once knew our family." Toby looked up inquisitively, clutching his plush heart. "Hi," he said, unafraid. Zachary swallowed. "Hi, Toby." His voice trembled with regret. 1,000 apologies were contained in that simple greeting. Amy said nothing more, leaving the moment suspended. After an awkward beat, Zachary added, "I have a letter, for him, for when he's older." He extended an envelope. She took it wordlessly. Toby, sensing the tension, tilted his head. "Mommy, can we go home now?" "Yes, sweetheart," she replied softly, guiding him toward the exit. She cast one last glance at Zachary. "Whatever you have to say, put it in writing. I'll decide when he's ready to read it." Zachary nodded, tears glistening in his tired eyes. Then in silence, he slipped away. Amy and Toby emerged into the nighttime air. Their car waited, engine humming. Toby's eyelids drooped with exhaustion. As she buckled him into his booster seat, he murmured, "Mommy, you fix hearts, right?" She paused, recalling how far they had both come. "Yes, baby, I fix little hearts every day." He let out a contented sigh, nuzzling against the seatbelt. "That's good," he whispered, eyes drifting shut. Amy shut the car door gently. Some hearts, she thought, could never truly be fixed, at least not by surgical skill alone. But she had Toby, and he had her. Together, their future shone brighter than any corporate empire could promise. The chauffeur pulled away from the curb, and Amy couldn't help but smile at her sleeping son. In the hush of the city streets, she silently thanked him for giving her the strength to rewrite her life story, one heartbeat at a time. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey, from Amy's heartbreak to her rise as a trailblazing surgeon and devoted mother. It's a testament to the power of resilience when destiny throws unforeseen challenges your way. Whether it's finding the courage to stand up for yourself, protecting those you love at all costs, or rediscovering broken bonds, these characters show us that hope can outshine even the darkest moments. We hope you've been inspired by their unwavering spirit. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to our channel and sharing the link with friends who appreciate a good tale of determination and redemption. And don't forget to let us know in the comments what you think. Did you see that ending coming? Where are you listening from, and which part touched you the most? We look forward to sharing even more compelling narratives with you soon.